Welcome everybody to our WELL webinar this morning. I'm glad that you could join with us from around the country, and it's lovely to see in the chat people are commenting already as to where they are joining us from. Our webinar this morning will be led by Dr. Claire Rush, who I will introduce in a moment, and it's called Rhythms of Grace, Soul Care and Leadership, and it's designed to help you to think about your relationship with God when you are in leadership. For those who have not been part of a Zoom webinar before, you'll notice it's a little bit different to an ordinary Zoom call in that you can't see each other. So it's very much about watching and listening, but the way that you can interact with everybody else is via the chat function at the bottom, which is already being quite active. But can I just make sure that when you put something into the chat, there are two settings. One goes to all panelists, which basically means it will be read by myself and Claire. And one says all panelists and attendees. So make sure that you are sending it to all panelists and attendees, and then everybody will see it. And we encourage you to put as much into the chat as you want throughout this webinar. If you've got comments on what Claire is talking about, or if you've got questions, please put them into the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat all the time. So if there are questions for Claire, we will hopefully, she'll be able to answer them as we go throughout the webinar. But if not, then towards the end of the webinar, I'll make sure that she's seen all your questions and we'll have a chance to answer them. So please do be as active as you can on the chat, because it helps to create that sense of community with all those people who are watching this morning. Just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the WELL Learning Hub YouTube channel following on from this. So you'll be able to watch it again should you want to. And also you could pass it on to other people that you might think would find it useful. We often get asked questions, will the PowerPoint be available? Yes, it will be. So anything that you see this morning, Claire will make that available to you after the webinar has finished. We will be together for about an hour and a half this morning. This webinar is due to finish at 12 o'clock, but don't worry, we will have a little break in the middle. We'll have a 5-minute break, so you can go and get a cup of tea, and we'll let you know when that's coming up. Other than that, I would like to introduce you to Claire, who's going to be leading the webinar this morning, and just to tell you a little bit about her. So Dr. Claire Rush is the Mission and Advocacy Enabler for Girls Brigade Ministries in the UK, and she's also Vice President of the Girls Brigade International. Girls Brigade has been going for 127 years, and it partners with churches in 50 countries around the world to reach girls and young women with the gospel. Claire has trained leaders, led workshops and delivered keynote speeches in over 18 countries across the world. She's represented the Girls Brigade at a United Nations conference in New York, and she's spoken about how faith and popular culture intersects in the lives of young people on both the BBC, UCB and on Premier Radio. And besides all of that Claire does for her work, she's also a volunteer Girls Brigade team leader in a local group in Northern Ireland. And she's actually been a member of the Girls Brigade since she was 3 years old. She's done a number of webinars for us over the last few months, all of which have been brilliant. If you haven't seen her previous webinars, do take a look at the WELL Learning Hub and catch up on those. But it's with great pleasure that I welcome Claire to join us this morning and to lead us in this webinar. Thanks ever so much, Claire, for being with us today.
Great, Meg. Thank you for that really good introduction. And it's really fantastic to be Zooming you from cold and wet Northern Ireland. I hope it's a bit warmer where you are, and it's really great to be back with you. Now, this session is all about soul care and leadership and our intimacy with God. So I just want to delve deep with the first question. I want you to use the chat function and be honest, because this is a safe place. If I was to ask you this question, what would be your one-word response? How is your soul right now? How is your soul right now? I would love it if you're brave enough to share. Honestly, there's no judgment here. This is a safe place. If we are honest, how is our soul feeling right now? So yeah, I'm just going to give you a minute to put it in the chat. I wish we could see each other and we could chat. But look at the chat function. Yeah, some people are being really honest. I'm hearing you. Weary, beaten and bruised, tired, dry, messy, a mix. Yeah, downcast. We had someone write deep earlier on. Thank you so much for your honesty. I love what Patricia wrote, regenerate. I'd love to hear more about your story, Patricia. That's a great word. But do you know what? Most of us, if we're really honest, we're feeling a bit weary. I just said to Meg before this, I've done 3 Zoom webinars, all different in the last 12, 14 hours. So my soul's feeling a bit weary as well. But isn't it great that we can come together today and really look at this issue in a really authentic way? And I want to hear, I know that we can't go into breakout rooms, which is sad, but I want to hear some of your strategies, some of the things that help you connect with God as well. And there'll be times for you to put that in the chat function. So this is very much, I know that I'm leading the webinar from the front, but this is very much a peer learning community. And I know that God has spoken to you in unique ways over this pandemic. And I just want to say that at the beginning, you know, if you are feeling just overwhelmed and discouraged, we have been in a 12-month pandemic, which is a global collective trauma, which has impacted all aspects of our life. So if you're feeling like that, it's probably actually completely natural. So don't put pressure on yourself that you're broken or you need to be fixed. But I pray today that we would have time to look at our own self-care, our soul care, our connection with God, and not only look at it in an abstract way, but look at practical things that in this pandemic, what can we do that can help us to connect with God in a deeper way during this really challenging times. Our theme for the year in GB International is maintaining, be faithful in challenging times. And this really is a challenging time. Now, I've got new content for you. If you've been to one of my webinars before, I've got new content, but there is room for me to bring in some of the stuff that I've done before, and it would be helpful. So I would love it. Matt is our technician extraordinaire. He does all the funky music and keeps us right. Matt's going to share a little poll. It's a 1-question poll. It's going to come up now. And it's literally just going to ask you, have you attended one of my webinars on managing emotions? I've done a number of them through a number of different kind of forums. So I just want to know if the main one was managing emotions in young people, but I just want to know what's the breakdown, because I'll amend the content accordingly. So that's great. So yeah, another 20 seconds. Just while you're doing that, I just want to say, that you're very much welcome. I am part of the Girls Brigade Ministries family. I'm not going to really mention Girls Brigade at all. It's not a publicity webinar for GB, but we do have a website if you want to find out more, and it's www.gb-ministries.org, and you can see that on the screen. So that's great. So we've got like a 75% format. So yeah, so just bear with me. The 9 people that have seen some of the content, it is completely different. There's just some things that I can use that would be helpful. So let me just share my screen now. I always feel like there's a gap. There's like is the screen going to come up? There we go. That's great. And let's get this started. So yeah, just right at the beginning, I just want to say it's been great to work with the Methodist Church in many different ways. They provided considerable funding for Girls Brigade to be able to do these Build Hope events where we've been talking to church leaders and youth workers. So I just want to say thank you so much for the resources so that Girls Brigade Ministries can help support leaders like you working with young people and children in your communities. So we already mentioned, haven't we, that it's a difficult year, and a lot has probably changed in our lives, but I want to say there has been negative and there has been some positive changes. And one of the positive changes in my life as a result of 2020 was that I started running intentionally. And I've always wanted to run. I wanted to run for years and years. I failed my couch to 5K 3 times, but 2020 was the year that I finished couch to 5K, and it was I did my first kind of 5K race for Girls Brigade in Northern Ireland. We did a colour run to celebrate our birthday, and that was an amazing experience. And I have to say, I went over the finish line battered, bruised, sweaty, and just covered in colour dust, but I made it. Even if I had to walk a little bit of it, I made the finish line. It just reminded me, God really used that to remind me of this verse that often we use in our ministries, isn't it? that God has a race marked out for us. And he's encouraging us, and the cloud of witnesses are encouraging us to throw off everything that hinders us in our race, in our discipleship with God, including sin. And he just wants us to run the race with perseverance, a race marked out for us, fixing our eyes always on Jesus. So you and I are both called to serve in God's mission, to finish our race. And I love what the Apostle Paul wrote. This is my prayer at the end of my time here, that I can stand in front of God and say, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith, I have ran through the obstacles. But some of you know from research, and this is a really sobering statistic, that 7 out of 10 leaders, Christian leaders, will not finish well. They'll drop out of the race, they'll burn out, they won't have any energy to keep on. And you know what? COVID-19 is challenging us as spiritual leaders more than ever. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time. I can imagine if you're anything like me, your to-do list is just overwhelming. And I'm sure there was a great temptation to plow on with that to-do list. But you stopped and said, no, my soul needs some rest. I need some replenishment. So that is a massive step. I just want to encourage you. Thank you for making that decision. I really want to honor our time together, because if you are feeling tired, if you are feeling worn out, and let's face it, a lot of us, we can put our hands up to say definitely we have felt times like that over the last 12 months. This verse is for us, isn't it? For some of us, it might seem like not a dream, but unobtainable at the minute, but Jesus calls us to come to him, to come back to him, to get away with him, because he'll show us how to take a real rest. He invites us to walk with him, to work with him, to watch him, to learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And I love this verse. It's very challenging, isn't it, when he says, I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. I'll give you what you can manage. I'll support you. I'll support you and I'll equip you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Even just reading that verse gives me goosebumps again, that when I'm feeling heavy and burdened, which has been often, that, Jesus wants to take that load from me so I can live freely and lightly. And I just love these four. What does that verse say to me? It's a verse we use so much. I want you to just think, just in your head, quiet in your head. The rhythms of grace is really talking about our connection with God, our intimate relationship with, our intimacy with God. And in that verse, God's just saying, come to me, get away with me, walk and work with me, keep company with me. It just sounds really simple, isn't it? But I don't know about you. When I feel stressed and exhausted and overwhelmed, sometimes, my quiet times with God, the way that I maintain my connection with God, that doesn't become a priority, because this to-do list that is demanding the people sending me emails, the webinars that I have to do, that becomes more critical in my kind of skewed brain. And God is still there saying to me, Claire, be still and know that I am God. So this is a reminder for me, everybody, as well. When I do this webinar, it's an issue that I'm really passionate about, because as you're going to hear over the next hour, so I've had experience of burnout. I have had that experience, and I really want to use what I've learned to share with you and help leaders who are maybe where I was, a couple of years ago. So what are we going to do? What is the nitty gritty of this webinar? As Meg said, I will make the slides available as a PDF, so you don't need to write everything down. We're going to look at what are some of the obstacles that really prevent us from keeping that connection with God. What drives some of us to work at overcapacity. So what are the practical things that we can do to build the rhythms of grace in our lives? And this is where I want to hear from you as well, everybody. Very much you have got learning and insight, and you've got experience that can help others. And at the end, I've done this in a previous webinar a little bit about, we are in the middle of a pandemic. how can we not just survive, but how can we thrive? So we're talking about stress management, anxiety management. It's a bit more practical, but we know that stress can be a barrier to our connection with God as well. Now, as you can see, you know, we are feeling a bit tired, a bit weary. I completely understand if you feel that you need to step away from this time together, maybe just step away from the screen. Maybe, you know, we want God to speak to us deeply, don't we? And when God speaks to us deeply, sometimes he reveals things that are quite challenging. So that's my prayer. And just feel free to step away, and please, if you want to talk further about any of these topics or issues, I really would invite you to go to your minister, someone that you really trust, and you can have a good chat about. But let's just pray really briefly before we kind of dive in. Father, thank you for this time together. Thank you for all these men and women that have taken time out of their busy work lives and their vocation to come and just be together and to rest. And you know our souls, Father. You know if we're tired and weary and overwhelmed. You know if we're yearning for deeper connection. You know if we're regenerated because we've had a deep experience with you. Father, all these feelings and emotions are valid, and we give them over to you, knowing that you love us and you don't want to shame us or make us feel guilty, knowing that you welcome us with open arms, that you are there for us even in the middle of these challenging times, Father. So speak to all of us deeply today, Father. Challenge us because we want to go deeper with you, Father. We want to maintain that connection even in the middle of a pandemic. We pray this in your name. Amen. Amen. So I want to start with the Bible. It's always a good place to start, isn't it? And I want to introduce you to a woman called Abigail. She was a woman of quiet courage and devotion. And you know what? If you've never heard of her, I'll be honest and say, until a couple of years ago, I had never really known the story of Abigail. I think I knew there was someone called Abigail, but I did not know her story. And when we did a Bible study on Abigail, such a powerful story. You know, here was a woman who's really a spiritual giant, a bit like Moses, that we can learn so much from, but yet we don't really study her story. When we first meet Abigail, we see her in 1 Samuel chapter 25. Now, she's described, like many of the biblical women, as beautiful. She was the wife of a prosperous farmer called Nabal, who was described as foolish and brutish, but there was so much more to Abigail than her beauty. Now, at the time, David was on the run from King Saul with 600 men, and he was hiding in the caves in Nabal's land. And it was a time of feasting, so obviously hospitality was so important at that time. And David sent Nabal a message and said, can you give us food? We're protecting your land, we're protecting your sheep and your shepherds. Can you give us some food in return? But what did Nabal do? He said, no, I'm not going to feed you. I'm not going to give you hospitality. So David's reaction, what was it? Basically, the Bible says, he said, strap on your swords, man. And he walked to Nabal's village with 400 men. And he was prepared to literally massacre the whole village because Nabal had really insulted him. But God had a different plan. And here comes Abigail. She was intelligent and prophetic. And when she heard what was about to happen, the Bible says, I love this, she flew into action. She loaded up her donkeys with food from her larder, and she courageously disobeyed her husband who told her not to do it. And she went out to meet David. Now, can you imagine this? Abigail, a woman by herself on a donkey, facing 400 men riding towards her. Like, imagine the nerves of steel that this woman must have had to obey God's calling. And when she came into contact with David, she was able to offer words of prophecy to David that weren't flattery. She didn't flatter David, but David could see that God was speaking through her, and it obviously softened his heart, and it changed his mind. But I love this verse. I just want to look at this verse. It says in 1 Samuel chapter 25:18, Abigail flew into action, and she took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep stressed out. I would love to know what that looks like. A bushel of roasted grain and 100 raisin cakes. Like, she had some larder, didn't she? She had all this food fresh in her larva, and she was just ready for action whenever God called. And I just think, I take that as a metaphor, okay? I don't think any of us have larders like that, but you might as a result of the pandemic. But her larder, I take as a metaphor for our souls. Her larder was full, it was renewed, it was replenished, and it was refreshed. It was ready for action. And I think I use that story as an illustration that God is challenging us. You know, are our souls, our spiritual storehouses, are we renewed, replenished, and refreshed and ready to go? You know, I don't know in your ministry, I'm sure you do. You ask people, you know, what is God saying to you right now? I love that question. I would love to hear from you too about what's your experiences of God in a pandemic? How's he been speaking to you? How's he been challenging you? How has he been delivering your needs for such a time as this? But sometimes when I ask that question, I don't know if you get this, I speak to somebody and they tell me something that God did for them 5 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. And although that's great, and it's still a great example of God working, we need to have a fresh encounter with God every day. He calls us to taste and see that the Lord is good. So are we having a fresh encounter with God, or has our relationship got a bit stale? And I know that the tension of this is that we are in a pandemic with extra pressure, but God is still calling us there, wanting to maintain a relationship, to refresh, replenish, and renew us for his calling for such a time as this, for all that mission work that you're trying to do in such a difficult time. He wants to be the source of your strength, of your wisdom, of your energy, because you and I know that we can't do it alone. And you are doing such important work. You're leaders in the Methodist Church, maybe locally, nationally, regionally. So it is so important that you and I, in these positions of leadership, where we are really at the front line of the battle between light and darkness. I often say to RGB leaders that you're punching holes in the darkness, you know, and you really are. You're punching God's hope and light in the darkness. And when you are there on the front line, you're beside the darkness as well. So your soul needs to be refreshed and replenished and renewed so that you're leaning on God's strength. You're doing incredible work, and we just want to continue to support you and encourage you in that. So yeah, that's a question for you to think about. I just want you to think for 1 minute. You don't have to write anything in the chat function. This is a reflection for you. But if you were honestly going to say on a scale of 1 to 10, if you want to do it like that, if that's helpful, if you're a visual person, you know, where do you think you are right now? And that's between you and God. You don't need to share it. I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to think about that. Father, we thank you that you are there for us and that you call us into a replenished, renewed, and refreshed relationship with you. To help us be really challenged by Abigail's example of how she was ready for action when you called her. And I know, Father, you're calling us to the front lines. You're calling us to punch holes in the darkness. So help us as a priority have times to reflect. Where are our souls with you? Do we feel refreshed and renewed, or do we feel stale? I pray this in your name. Amen. Amen. So I want to kind of break out just for a wee creative activity. For some people like to write things down. Let's get into the nitty gritty. You know, let's be honest, what are some of the obstacles in our life at the minute that prevent us, our intimacy with God, that prevent us from having that fresh relationship, that prevent us from maybe connecting with God in a different way? So if you'd like to be creative, you can see on my little screen, I have done a lovely brick wall on a piece of paper. I hope you can see that it is a brick wall. You will be not surprised to know that I didn't get a great mark in my art at school. But I'd love you to draw a brick wall if you're a visual person and that helps. And I would love you just to think about, on that brick wall, what are some of the obstacles in your life that prevent you from having that fresh connection with God, that prevents you from going deeper with God. Just one word answers. I'd love you to put it on your piece of paper. And if you want to as well, you can put some of your ideas on the chat function as well. If you want to share them, you can put 1 or 2 ideas as well. It'd be great to hear from you. So yeah, so like, please put your obstacles down. I'm just going to read through some of the stuff that people have said in the chat, because I did invite you to share how God's working in your life. And this is such an encouragement. I love that Louise has been able to have a time of rest and reflection. Yeah, it's been a real time of reset, hasn't it, as well, for many of us, where our routines have gone, our routine of the way life used to be has been taken away from us. So we have been responsible for creating a new routine. And for some of us, maybe we've been on furlough or for what other reasons, we've had more time for rest and reflection. So that's great, Louise. And Lorraine shared that God has given her a peace when she struggled to sell her house. And he's given her new opportunities to serve him. That's amazing to hear as well. I love, Louise also said that Ruth has spoken to her. The story of Ruth has spoken to her about being a foreigner in a country. And thank you for reminding us, Louise, that God is everywhere and every moment of her life. So that's great. That's really, really good. So thank you for encouraging one another. I think Rachel, great. You know, you had to be reminded by a friend that I'm not doing it on my own. Absolutely, that God is a partner with us. And that is so important, because this is why the intimacy is so important, that we're not doing it on our own, and we're not doing it in our own strength. But when we neglect relationship with God, then we are doing it on our own. We are doing it in our own strength. But God wants to partner with us, you know, in his mission of restoration. So how are you getting on with your obstacles? If you want, maybe put 1 or 2 on the chat function, and let's hear from you about what are some of the things you can do. You don't have to do it personally. You can do it, you know, in terms of generally, this is what some people struggle with. But we'd love to hear some of your suggestions. As you can see, the chat is encouraging people. You sharing your experiences with one another, you're encouraging each other, and you're encouraging me as well. There's so much that we can learn from each other. Yeah, so yeah, and when we live in fear, so fear, yeah, that's a major one. And like, let's face it, in many ways, when we turn on the TV at the minute, we are living in a culture of fear, aren't we? There's just so much to be uncertain about. So it's hard not to experience fear. And lethargy, yeah, I mean, that's another thing. We can feel so tired and exhausted by what's happening around us, in the pandemic in particular, that we just don't feel we have energy. Lack of purpose, that's a really, really important point, and lack of vision as well. And then Mary, you're right, busyness, just doing too much, you know, trying to do too much. And yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You know, our mental health, you know, that can affect us in so many different ways. And yes, some of us have experienced breakdowns and burnout because of the situation. Some of us experience grief. Some of us are just trying to manage. Some of us are just trying to get by every day, aren't we? We're trying to survive the day, juggling so much. Yeah, you're now finding that you're living at work rather than working from home. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, everybody. I know that some of these might not be personal to you, but if they are personal to you, we hear you and we see you, and we stand in solidarity with you. You know, a lot of us are experiencing the same things. Yeah, Roderfia, sorry if I said your name wrong, but yeah, wanting to be in control, like our pride is something that, yeah, that can stop us. So let me just, I have to go out and share the screen again, because the PowerPoint, I've learned from all my Zoom sessions, the PowerPoint always freezes when I try to share my screen after I've looked at the chat function. So let me just go back. So yeah, thank you so much for your contributions. So much there to unpack. If you take anything from that, I want you to know that you're not alone. That's the one thing I want you to take. If some of those things are personal obstacles to you, you're not alone. And I hope that you're encouraged by what other people have shared. But yeah, look at some of the stuff I put up online. You know, you've mentioned that some of us are coping with tragedies in our families and our communities, grief. Some of us just are just the responsibilities that we've got during this pandemic has been overwhelming. Some of us just, like you said, are just tired. and exhausted from it. Other things like our pride, we like to be in control. We like to do things in our own strength. We don't want to hand over that control to God. Some of us, sin. I know that you probably know this too. You've experienced that when you've got sin in your life that's not resolved. It can be a massive barrier between you and God. It can be a massive barrier wanting to talk to God because you don't really want to be in his presence. And it can be a massive barrier to really seeing his vision and really hearing from him. So those are just some of the things. I can't look at all of them today, but I want to look at two kind of more practical ones that I think from my work. I've done this webinar a couple of times with church leaders and youth workers and volunteer youth workers, and these are the things that have kind of come up and I've got experience in. So I really want to share what God has taught me through my experience, and I hope and pray that it helps you. But as I said, busyness. So there's a lot of different reasons why we're busy. And we have to face the fact that in a pandemic where we've had to change our working conditions, where maybe some of you there might be some volunteer leaders here that are frontline workers, where your working routine is completely changed, where you're juggling homeschooling plus working full time, looking after elderly parents or other caring responsibilities. Your life is going to be busy. That's just a reality. So for you guys, that life is just busy because you do have to fulfill these responsibilities. We see you in that, and we are just praying for you as you put one foot in front of the other, praying that God provides you with energy and comfort and peace. But for some of us, we do choose busyness, and this is what I'm talking about. And maybe even during a pandemic, some of us choose to be busy. I want you to think about, is that you? And maybe even think about before the pandemic, did you choose to make your life really, really busy? Because I definitely know that I did. I made a conscious choice to fill my life with lots of responsibilities that were optional, getting involved in lots of different things. And this is what I'm talking about. And I want to look a little bit about what drives us to work at overcapacity. Why, when we have the choice, when some of us have the choice, we literally make the choice to make our lives really busy. As I said, for you guys here that, you have no choice, we hear you. And this is not for you. This is not to shame or make you feel guilty. But I'm talking to some of us that make decisions to make our life really hurried and busy, and we actually choose to do that. So that was me, and I want to tell you a little bit about my experience. So a couple of years ago, I went to Iceland. Isn't that amazing? In the time when we could get on a plane and we could travel to a different country, those were the days. I don't know if any of you have been to Iceland, but one of the things I was really excited about was I got to go and see a geyser. And we stood in front of this geyser outside of Reykjavik, waiting for it to erupt to get photographs. Now, I have to say, this is not my photograph. I'm not taking copyright, but this is not my photograph. But I love standing in front of the geyser, and I loved watching it erupt. And it reminded me of a time where I was doing prayer ministry at a festival for young people, and someone prayed over me that I was going to be the geyser of the Holy Spirit. Like, isn't that like an amazing prayer, that you're going to have the Holy Spirit just come out of you? And as I was standing in front of this geyser, I remembered that. But God said something differently. He was like, Claire, right now, you're not that geyser. You're not the geyser that's erupting. Right now, this is what you are. This is what a geyser looks like when it falls back into the earth, like a big empty hole. And that was a really hard truth for me to learn. And God really spoke to me through this image. It took me a wee while to really listen to him, of course, but I was like that empty hole because I had given out so much. I was doing so much. I hadn't come back to God to be replenished and refreshed. I was doing so many serving responsibilities, so much. And I thought I was doing great for God, but actually I was doing it all in my own strength. And this was a real reminder. But it took me a wee while to really hear this. It took me actually to have an actual spiritual burnout. And it was a spiritual burnout, and it was coupled with a mental burnout. About 5 years ago, I completely broke down, and I didn't actually think that I was ever going to leave my house again. It was really that severe. It was a very difficult time, a very dark time, but God was there in the midst of it, and I can clearly felt his presence, and it was tough, but he took all those broken bits and he put me back together again in a new and better way. And the core learning from this experience was that my intimacy with God is the key. My connection, maintaining that connection with God. And it made me look at myself, you know, how did I get into this state? And I realized, you know, that I was a busy bragger. You know, I don't know if I was to meet you walking down the street, if we could go to Costa and get a coffee and I said, how are you? Would you be the type of person that says, I'm busy? Because I did. And I think for a long time, I thought that was a really good thing. I'm really busy, but I'm good. But now I stop myself saying that. And if I say that I'm busy, I'm kind of like cringing about it, because being busied and hurried is not always the best thing. And that's a little bit about my story. And if I was going to kind of ask you 3 questions, if you identify with that, maybe in pre-COVID times when you had a bit more control of your life, if you could identify, yeah, that you actually made a choice to make your life really busy, then I want to kind of share 3 things that can really help you help you kind of refine, kind of peel back that busyness. And the first one is, somebody already wrote it in the chat function, purpose. Do we know God's purpose and vision for our lives? Now, I know some of you are maybe in vocational ministry, you're paid ministry employment, and that's great. Some of you might be volunteers, some of you might be still really searching for God's path in that way. So there's kind of 2 levels, you know, to this question. You know, if you're in ministry, then you're probably being overloaded with a lot of projects that you could do, aren't you? There's always a needs in your community. There's always needs. So it's kind of knowing about what is the need for now. What is God calling you to address right now? What are the projects that are for such a time as this? If you're still searching for your kind of vocation or a God-given purpose, it's kind of spend that time with God, isn't it? And I'm going to share a little bit in practical ways, you know, how you can do it. Because someone really wise said to me that there's so many things that we can say yes to, of course. And if you are in ministry, volunteer or employment, then you will know that people will always be coming to you with ideas and things to do. So what are the things that only you can say yes to? What is in your unique giftings and your callings? And what are the things that other people can do? Because I know from my experience, I said yes to everything. I love to be involved. I wanted to be part of these things. I was a yes, yes, yes person. And I think this might come from this idea that we live in a culture where productivity is really an idol. And you think about the industrial revolution 120 years ago, that's when machines were really born. And machines can work 24/7 and they can always be outputting products and mechanisms, but we are not machines. We are not machines. We need rest. We need refreshment. But our culture, a lot of us judges us on what we output, don't we? We get judged by our projects and what we achieve, by our degrees, by our job titles. Our culture in many ways can really put a lot of pressure on us to feel that we need to keep achieving. And number 3, this was one that was really personal for me. I think I was really hustling for my own worth. I was looking at my worth and value depended on the projects that I was involved in, depended on what other people thought about me, depended on my output. So I know that you're wiser than me, wiser than I was 5 years ago. And we know that our worth and value is being made in God's image. We know that. But sometimes when you listen to the messages around us in our culture, we can become distracted from that. We can feel that our worth depends on how many people come to our webinars, how many young people come to our online Zoom group. So we'll do so much, we'll go above and beyond to make sure that that is a success. So those are 3 things that you might identify with. Maybe you've got other reasons. It'd be great for you to share if you feel that you've made busyness a choice in your life, you know, that you don't have to do everything that's on your plate. I'd love to hear in the chat, you know, what are some of the reasons why. And, you know, with the hustle and work, these are some questions that I had to ask myself a couple of years ago. And if I keep asking myself, you know, why am I always striving to make myself busy? Why am I always making myself busy? What makes me believe that achieving and doing will make me safe? Am I sacrificing my own happiness and health to gain the approval from others? So those are really deep questions that I had to sit with. And I kind of came to the conclusion that it was me that was making myself really busy. I didn't have to do all the projects and all the events that I was asked if I had to. I believed it gave me an idea of safety doing it, because I believed that getting approval from other people, that's where I judged my worth and my value. So God really had to break that down for me, to rebuild me, to see, obviously, that is not the case. You know, and like, I love, this is a great book if anyone's really struggling about this, Running on Empty by Phil Anderson. Are we unable to distinguish between activity and identity? So our activity and our capacity determines our identity. Are we unable to distinguish between activity and identity? So our activity determines our identity. We are what we do, basically, not who we are in Christ. That was a real pivotal quote for me to look at. And like, yeah, some of us are too busy doing for God rather than just being with God. I think I had this inflated belief that I was God's personal assistant, and I was doing all these great things for God. I was definitely doing it for his glory, but sometimes God was just saying, Claire, I want you to stop. I want you to rest. I want you to come sit at my feet. I want to replenish you. I want to refresh you. I want you to go deeper with me, because obviously we can only bring people to a depth of God that we are at a level with. And I just want to say, for some of us, sometimes the most courageous thing to do is to stop and be still. Actually, for some of us, that is the most courageous thing that we can do. And I want to say thank you for doing that today. As I said before, you've done this in your busy schedule. So you're about to have a wee 5-minute break. We're going to look at more the practical things. What are some of the strategies? What are some of the things that you've found useful kind of to go deep with God? And we really want to hear from you. But I love this image of the mobile phone, our battery. You know, we were not made to have infinite battery. And I don't know if you've ever had an awful occasion where your mobile phone has died when you needed it. I remember having a boarding pass and I was getting on a plane and the phone just went, just died. And it was a bit of a panic. But if we were to look at those batteries, where would you be on that battery scale? Would you be a full battery that's fully charged and ready to go? Would you be a plugged in battery? So you're using this webinar to recharge. Would you be deplenished? Would you be slowly charging up? You know, this is a useful visual aid for you to think about. Where are we right now? Are we plugged in? Are we raring to go? Are we in desperate need of recharging and replenishment? So when we come back after our 5-minute break, we're going to look at how can we build, what are some of the practical things that we can do to build rhythms of grace into our lives. So I would say go and stretch your legs, get a cup of tea, and bring a nice sweet treat or savory treat back with you. And I'd love to hear in the chat function what you brought. So I can be really envious and be really jealous of something nice. I don't have anything in my house at the minute, so I haven't been able to do any shopping. So yeah, enjoy your 5-minute break, and thank you so much for your attention and for listening. Great, welcome back everybody. Can we just have a wee round of applause for Matt, who chooses the best music ever in our little breaks. Thank you so much, Matt, and happy birthday, Louise. It's great that you've joined us on your birthday, and I'm loving hearing that people have some gorgeous biscuits. Like, I'm not jealous about the dark chocolate coated ginger or the Bakewell slice or the cream egg. Beautiful. Nice that you've treated yourself. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go to the shop after and get something too. I'm feeling a little bit of a sweet tooth. So thank you so much for coming back, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. And thank you so much for what you've said. Actually, I've been reading through the chat. It's really hard to keep, I can't read the chat when I'm talking because it freezes my screen, but I managed to have a wee look during the break. And I hear you know, I hear the pressures of ministry in churches where they want to fit you into their box, and maybe you feel like you're not using your giftings for the best way that you could, or I'm hearing the fact that people are saying it's difficult to say no. And I would love to invite others on this webinar to share their wisdom into those areas, particularly how do we say no well when the pressure for us is to say yes. And if you have learned the habit of saying no, one of the things that I do is that I find this really helpful because I would have immediately said yes to nearly every invitation that would have come my way, that I learned to say, thank you so much for that idea or that invitation or whatever. Let me pray about it and get back to you. So it gave me a little bit of space between the urge to say yes or the pressure to say yes right away. It gave me that little space to actually think about those key practical questions. Do I have the time and capacity to take on this project? Now, I realize in a work situation that is harder when your boss is asking you, but there are still valid things for you to think about. Like, do you have the capacity and the hours that you do with the other projects and initiatives that you're responsible for? So just not immediately saying yes, even if you really want to, because you think it's a great idea. But I know that some of you will have wisdom as well. So I really invite you to share that on the chat function and encourage one another, because one of the things that I want you to come away from, I hope you get some practical from what God is using me to speak to you. But if not, I just pray that you feel that you're not the only one feeling the feelings that you're experiencing right now, and that there are others, and that you are in a community very much care and love you. So yeah, so we're going to look at this question. These are practical things, because I'm a practical person. And I realize that some of them might be really simple, but sometimes it's the simple things that we need to be reminded of, to come back to. It's the foundational things. But I'm going to give you an opportunity at the very end of this to actually have you share. So if you want to start writing what you find helpful, it means I can read it out quicker when we come to that. But I've got 3 things that I want to share with you, all very simple, I know. But like I said, let's go back to the foundations. And this is what helped me. This is from my experience a couple of years ago, and it's helped me not to become burnt out again, because I have been at risk of burnout. I still have those personality traits, like to be involved with things, that I can be a people pleaser if I'm not careful. So I've had to learn a new rhythm and a new habit of doing things. And the number one is like the spiritual disciplines. And I teach this a lot on a leadership training course called History Makers by the International Leadership Institute. And I don't know about you, but I really hate the word discipline. Like, it just feels really kind of like strict and kind of old-fashioned. But you know what? Disciplines help shape and form our life. So I told you that I started running. So I now run, if there's no ice, I run about 5 times a week. I do 5Ks a week, and it's become a discipline. It's become a habit. It's what I do. I get up in the morning. I now, instead of getting up and looking at my email, which I did, I used to get up really early and turn on my computer. I get up and I go for a walk in the morning. Now, I know that I'm fortunate. I have the ability to do that, but I have created this rhythm where it's actually a discipline now. I get up, I go for my walk or for my run. And if I was an athlete training for the Olympics, I would have to be disciplined to go out and really do my training. And we are in a race. We looked at that verse at the beginning. We are in a race with God, fixing our eyes on Jesus. So we need to throw off anything that hinders us and keep our eyes fixed on him. And that requires discipline. And I love that verse in John 15 where God reminds us that he is the vine. And some of you have been writing that in the chat function, that everything we do, our source is God. We need to be the fruit on God's vine. But when we're not connected with the vine, we're not, how can that vine bear fruit? How can we bear fruit? So spiritual disciplines help us maintain that connection with God. I'm sure you probably teach spiritual disciplines in your areas, so you know all about them, and there are many others. Now I want to say something about, very often when I teach these to younger leaders, they feel like they need to do every single one of these disciplines, like it's like a tick box, and they need to do everything. Obviously we know it's good to read the Bible, and it's important to pray and talk to God, and it's really important that we worship God. That's what we were created to do. But we shouldn't see these disciplines as tick boxes that we have to just tick the box and then we're done. And with some of these other ones like journaling and silence and solitude and fasting, I would love to invite you, if you haven't done so, to try some of these disciplines if you haven't tried them before, because this could be your unique connection with God. So I'll give you an example. I don't really like journaling, so I know that really journaling is not a way that I can maintain a deep connection with God. But I learned over the last 10 years that my connection with God comes through silence and solitude. Now, I know some of you are saying, that's great, Claire, but how in the pandemic can we get silence and solitude? So I know that is a challenge, but it's where I have found connection with God. So what does that look like in a pandemic? It means I go out for a walk by myself every day, even if it's for 30 minutes. I go out into I live in a town. I'm very lucky, I live by the sea. And I go out and I speak to God in that silence and solitude of just walking by myself. So that's what it looks like during a pandemic. But I would love to invite you to think about how do you connect deeply with God? Where are the places? What are the things that you do that help you maintain that connection with God? And there's a great book, some of you may have read it. It's by Gary Thomas, and it's called Sacred Pathways. And he outlines the 9 sacred pathways that most people fit into. Of course, there are people that don't, of course, but most of us will fit in to some of these pathways. So it's really interesting. I would really encourage you to read this book. And actually he has a quiz online that's free. So you could go on his website and just do a quick kind of quiz. Obviously, it doesn't reveal everything, but it gives you an idea. So I would have said, this is really, really interesting. Before, up to 2 years ago, I would have said I'm definitely someone that connects with God through activism and through kind of maybe intellectual. But you know what God has revealed to me in the last 2 years? That I am actually, that one of my best sacred pathways to going deeper with him is being a naturalist. I never knew that my deepest connection comes when I'm outdoors, and in particular when I'm on top of a mountain. Believe it or not, I didn't know that until about a year ago. So does anybody, looking at those lists, it'd be great, put in the chat function, do any of you identify with any of those kind of pathways and you think, yeah, that's where I feel most connected with God, that's where I feel that I'm going deeper? I'd love to hear some of your ideas, and you can put it in the chat and see if some of you kind of link up. But yeah, this is me a year ago, up a mountain. Unfortunately, due to lockdown, you can see I can't really go up this mountain. It's about 60 minutes from my house. But when I am on top of a mountain, God speaks to me really deeply. And we shouldn't be surprised, because look at Moses, look at all the people in the Bible that God spoke to on top of mountains. But God reveals things to me in nature. He speaks deeply to me. So I know that in my lifestyle now, I need silence and solitude. I need that daily walk with God. I need those times when I can go and just surround myself with nature. So that's Slieve Donard, the highest mountain in Northern Ireland, on a glorious day. And I felt so deeply connected with God when I was on top of that mountain. And he challenged me and he spoke words of truth into my life. And I actually, when I say I don't journal, when I come off a mountain, I actually do sit down. So that's not right. I do sit down and write what he has spoken to me. So yes, you find your unique connection with God. And all of us will connect with God differently. And I would say, if that's your unique connection, you know what your unique connection with God is. My next question to you is, well, how much time and space and energy have you been able to do that one thing that helps you connect with him? I know that we're in a pandemic, but if you can work around your routines, if you can ask people to help look after your children, or if you can just get in a bath for 15 minutes to be alone, if you can, I would encourage you to build those habits into this pandemic lockdown life as well. So number 2, some of you might know God's vision for your life, and that's really, really great. But this was really helpful for me 5 years ago, because I felt so passionate about so many things. I was involved in so many things. But what was the one thing that God was calling me uniquely to be involved in. And I actually wrote down my vision statement. And I know my vision statement is like a little bit complicated. Like you can just have like a one sentence, a few words vision statement. And the vision is the alternative future that you want to see. So my vision is a hope-filled world where every person, including girls and women, understand their God identity and discovers their God-given purpose. So like writing that down really helped me, because when people asked me to do things, then I was able to think, does that fit with my vision? And I was able to be brave, and I was able to say no. Or, you know, this really helped me discern what God was calling me to do. Some people find it really helpful to have a life verse in particular to help them kind of guide them, you know, just praying for a verse that speaks into your life at the minute and using that as guidance in what direction that you go, so you have a purpose and a vision. I know that some of us may be experiencing furlough. Some of us may be experiencing maybe even the threat of redundancy, or we have been made redundant and we don't have the job security at the minute. And I really identify with that as well. And I just pray, you know, that these are the great times when you are able to have more space. We can either use that. Of course, it's challenging for our mental health when we define our purpose and our worth about what we do, but we can also use those kind of breaks to think about actually going back to God, looking at our spiritual disciplines, looking at what He's called us to do. So these are just some things. If you're feeling that you're drifting at the minute, these are some key questions that I've asked myself. You know, do you know your God-given purpose? Do you have a life verse? Do you have a sense that you are in a particular season? Because there are 4 seasons in a year. Some of us might be in summer and our projects and our mission is really blooming. Some of us might feel like we're in winter, it's barren, it's desolate, things that we were involved in have come to an end because of pandemic. Maybe our roles have come to an end as well, and we're in the winter season. But winter can also be for hibernation, can't it? It can be for rebuilding and restoring, like the way you think about animals that hibernate in winter. So there's a pro and con for each of these seasons. But I love this. I know that Bill Hybels is quite a problematic leader at the minute, unfortunately, with his own personal example. But I did enjoy this book, Simplify, whenever it came out. And it really encouraged me, this verse: simplified living is about more than doing less. It's about being who God called us to be, with a wholehearted, single-minded focus. It's about walking away from innumerable lesser opportunities in favor of the few to which we've been called and which we've been created for. And this is key in my life too. You know, we talk about Sabbath. Sabbath was actually a radical religious concept of its day. And isn't it incredible that when God created the earth, he made the earth in 6 days, and he had 1 day where he rested. It's in the first couple of chapters in the Bible. And the Jews called the Sabbath Shabbat, which I love. I love that concept. But I think sometimes in church we call the Sabbath Sunday. It's the day. And if you're in church leadership, you know, I was a youth worker in a church for many years. Sunday was like the most stressful and overwhelming day of the whole week. So I like the concept of Shabbat, thinking about when can we have a Shabbat time in our day, not just 1 day a week. When can we get that 30 minutes with God? Is it when you're making your cup of tea in the morning, you know, just when you get up? Is it a 15-minute walk after dinner? Where can you make Shabbat a rhythm in your life? And I realize in the pandemic it's difficult, but we can still, there are ways. And if you've been able to find times to rest in the middle of this whole shift in our lives, I'd love you to share your coping mechanisms or your strategies and what you've done. But if you're finding it overwhelming because you're homeschooling children, you're working full time, please don't put pressure on yourself to add this as a tick box. But do think about, you know, even when I'm struggling with homeschooling, with caring for others, is there 10 minutes? Is there 5 minutes? Is there something I can do? Is it listening to worship music in the morning? Is there something that I can do just to keep that connection with God alive? So those are the 3 things that I have found useful. And I would love to hear from you. What are some of the practical strategies that help you feel connected with God? So I'm just going to go in the chat. So hopefully Sometimes the chat freezes and I can't see. I can't see the chat function. Let's see. There we go. So what is some of the stuff that you have done? I can't do a breakout room. Obviously, I would love to do a breakout room. I'd love to get you talking to one another. But I can be your voice in the webinar by sharing a little bit about what you've written. Sorry, I can't see the break. Let me just go out and see if I can do. Okay, so that's great. So I'm going to read out what some people have said. I love that some people identify with like the caregiving. Yeah, I think a lot of us in churches, you identify with that. You're in ministry because you care for people. And very good, Pat, you know, absolutely that your sacred pathways can change as you age, you get to know one another and you get to know yourself in a deeper way. I love that Chrissy connects through worship and praise. But obviously that has been, I can see that obviously when you can't do corporate worship and singing and you can't be part of a fellowship of a group of people together, that's really, really difficult. I hope you find ways to manage that. I love that Louise has quoted Julian of Norwich, amazing, all shall be well and all shall be well and all manners of things shall be well. But we know this great wisdom, but it is difficult, isn't it? Like it is difficult sometimes when we're dealing with the challenges. So yeah, I love that someone else has discovered pathways that they didn't think that applied to them. It's not amazing? Like honestly, this is a result of lockdown and of a whole life reset, and someone's been reading that book and they're on their third time, so you'd highly recommend it. Great. Some people are looking at walking and swimming. Oh, the cold water swimming, that is a goal for me this year. And I love that you're an early morning person. Then you're an early morning person, you get up at 5 a.m. And Jo said that she makes time to go for walks. Same here. Doesn't matter if it's raining outside, I go for my walk and it really helps me. It helps me hear from God. It helps me clear my head. And we've got another person who's an ice swimmer and someone else who's a spiritual director. That's really, really good. So yeah, any other ways, practical things. And yeah, Fiona, you're so right. That's not one of the pathways. I'm just going to look at that because that just seems strange that creativity was not on the pathway. Let me have a wee look. Yeah, creativity. I wonder where that would fit in. Yeah, so I think you need to go and talk to Gary and say, Fiona, where does creativity fit in? Because you're so right. Yeah, some of you maybe enjoy painting or creating music or poetry. So yeah, thank you so much. Please keep sharing what you're finding helpful. Amin says that when I get up in the morning, sit in the lounge in the darkness and the silence before the house waits. If you're a morning person, that is really great. Some of you might not be a morning person. I'm a morning person, but some of you might be. But like you said, it's important to find out what works for you. And I just want to encourage you. I have a great friend, a colleague that always says that God didn't make us to be cookie cutter Christians. We're all different. We're not molded the same way. And he created us with unique connections to him, and it's up to us to find those unique sacred pathways and to really nurture them. So like I love that Fiona says God uses pictures. That's great. I was at a wonderful retreat in Bulgaria with a bunch of women, and one of the ladies leading the session used incredible artwork to really speak to us. It was amazing. I remember that in the room. It was incredible. So what I want you to take from this, I'm going to move on a little bit to talk about stress and anxiety. It's going to be a bit more practical in terms of what we're facing in our everyday life. But what I want you to take from this is be encouraged that there are other people that connect with God like you. We all connect differently. There's no pressure. There's no better way to connect with God. But what I would love to encourage you is to look at what are the different ways when you think about your life. Where do you feel most connected with God, and how can you fit that in more? How can you even fit it in for 5 minutes extra a day so that you're maintaining that connection? How can you make it not a pressure for you to do, but something that you want to do? And I would say that's how habits are formed, isn't it? You know, habits are formed when we discipline ourselves, that it becomes natural and actually we enjoy it. I actually enjoy going out running 5 times a week. Sometimes I don't, but most times I enjoy it. It's now become a habit. I enjoy walking up a mountain and speaking to God as I go. So I really pray that you experience that too. So yeah, we've got like 20 minutes to the end. Thank you so much for staying with us. And I know some of you have been to one of my webinars about managing emotions, but I feel like I can't end this webinar without talking a bit about stress and anxiety, because that's a really practical thing that we're dealing with. So let me just share my screen. And hopefully, if you've heard a little bit of it before, it speaks to you in a different way, or it reminds you of something that we examined before. But we do have to be realistic that COVID has impacted everything. And if you're feeling overwhelmed and exhausted because of the additional pressure, you're not alone. I really want you to know that. And we hear this a lot, don't we? We heard a lot, like we're in the same boat. We heard the government say that a lot, but actually we're not in the same boat. We're all in the same storm. Yeah, we're all going through the pandemic, but actually all of our circumstances on this call are different. Some of us have more additional responsibilities than others, as we can see in the chat. Some of us have been able to use this time for rest, actually, and to reset, and it's maybe not been as stressful. But so I want you to recognize that I can't speak into your life. I can't speak into everyone's life in the same way here, because we're all in different circumstances, and COVID-19 has impacted us all differently. But one thing that is similar, and I want you to understand that we are experiencing a collective trauma. The whole world is, and that might sound a bit dramatic. You might be thinking, Claire, that is very dramatic using the word trauma, but this is the definition of what a trauma is. It's an event that's outside of our control. It's beyond our usual experience, and it causes us to feel like our life or the lives of people we love are in danger. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of COVID-19, I think about all that. Yeah, I can't control COVID. I've never experienced this before, and I have been really worried about my mom and dad and other people that I love, that they may be in danger. So it is a trauma, and our body responds in unique ways when it goes through a trauma. It triggers a hormonal response, and very much that hormonal response produces the emotion of fear in our bodies. And some of you mentioned that living in a culture of fear is definitely a barrier to our connection with God, when we're scared, when we're fearful. But you know, do not fear is actually one of the most used phrases in the Bible, which is really, really incredible. God understands that emotion. But I want you to understand what happens when we feel fear, when we feel that, when our body experiences that trauma. Fear is not actually a bad thing. In most situations, when we feel fear, it's to keep us out of danger. It's to keep us safe. Our body responds by going into that fight, flight, and freeze response. Now, I want you to be really honest. Who knows who this guy is? Come on, be honest. You're maybe children's and youth workers, so you have to be down. You've got to be down with the culture and down with the kids. You know who this guy is. This guy was the Netflix phenomenon last March. We all went into lockdown. We all couldn't leave our homes. Most of us, and most young people I work with, they turned on the Tiger King. And this guy, to cut a long story short, owned an exotic zoo in America and kept these tigers in big cages, and very often was seen walking into the cage with the tiger. And I don't know about you, but I was kind of thinking, you're absolutely, what planet are you on, walking into danger? But I want you to imagine that you're at the Tiger King Zoo that's no longer there because he's in jail, and you walk into a cage with a tiger. I wonder what your response would be, because we all respond in different ways. Some of us would fight. Maybe we think, you know, if we didn't think the tiger was going to be there, say we walked into a room in the zoo and a tiger came in after us, some of us would fight, would be like, we're going to fight this tiger to survive. Now, I would say brave people. Some of us would flee. I think I would be that. I think I would try my best to run as far away from the tiger. Some of us would freeze. We just wouldn't know what to do. And I want to say, these are all natural responses, and no one response is better than the other. We all have, our bodies all respond to trauma in fight, flight, and freeze response. And do you know what? The reality is, for most of us, we have been on fight, flight, and freeze response for the last 11 months. For some of us, when we go to the supermarket, we're on fight, flight, and freeze response. Think about a year ago when you went to Tesco's, Sainsbury's a year ago, or Lidl. You just had to remember your shopping lists and make sure you had everything on it. When we go to Tesco's, Sainsbury's, Lidl now, we have to make sure we've got a mask. We have to make sure we sanitize our hands, 2 meter distancing from people. When you hear somebody cough, you don't want to cough. You think you've got COVID. Think about how overwhelmed our brains are in normal everyday life. And I love this image of a plane. I was last on a plane 11 months ago. And I love when the steward says, we're going to dim the cabin lights for landing, and the plane comes down. We dim the lights. That's what our brain, for some of us, that's what our brains are like. We are like a plane with dimmed lights coming into land. That means we are not operating at optimum capacity, because it's not possible to operate at optimum capacity when we are in fight, flight, and freeze response. It's just not possible for our brain. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, that you can't cope with the level of work and stuff that you did a year ago, you are natural. You're a human being, because for some of us, our brain is completely overwhelmed in this fight, flight, and freeze response. We're kind of at it. We're not even aware that we're still in it. It's just become a natural state for some of us. Now I'm going to go through these slides because we've got limited time, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. If you're feeling those feelings, to like, you're not alone, you're not broken, you're not doing it, you're maybe comparing yourself to other people. How can they cope? As they can cope better than me. We're all different, and we're all experiencing the pandemic in different ways. So thinking about what can we do? How can we thrive? How can we not just survive? Maybe what 2021 is going to bring. So I want to say, first of all, I want to encourage you. You survived 2020, a year that we never thought we were ever going to have to cope with. Nobody could predict it. You survived. You put one foot in front of each other. You survived yesterday and all the challenges it's brought. But I just want to say 5 things. I'm going to speak really quickly before we end. And I hope this is helpful in terms of it's connected with how we manage stress and anxiety. And we identified, some of you identified, that stress and anxiety is a barrier to your connection with God. So this is why I'm talking about this. I hope it helps you really in a practical way, which I'm going to fly through. Okay. So just to understand stress, I've looked in a lot, studied a lot of stress to understand it. Stress, not all stress is bad. Stress can help us. Whenever I have a deadline, I need a bit of stress to really bring my optimum performance. But as that graph shows, if we are stressed for a long period of time, we are not going to have an optimum performance. We're actually going to burn out. So it's recognizing that stress can be good, but in large doses where it's overwhelming, it's not so good. So how can we use stress to, how can we manage stress? I've got some ideas here. Okay, so I've done this before with some of you. The stress bucket is a really great tool to use, and basically it's understanding like our life is like that bucket, and we can put lots of things in it that can be really stressful. Now you think about all the stuff that would be in your bucket, in your stress bucket, before the pandemic, and then think about all the added stress that's went into your life because of the pandemic. Now if that bucket just keeps getting filled and filled, then it's just going to be overwhelmed, isn't it? It's just going to completely overfill. But you see that little tap, and that's your healthy mechanism tap. You can help drain the bucket by doing things like resting, relaxing, eating well, sleeping, doing exercise. So this is a really good stuff you can do with young people if you're working with young people, getting them to understand how they manage their stress. I'm just going to flick through that. But the number 2 thing is, so not only learn to identify, understand, and manage stress, but actually validate your emotions. The way that you feel, if you're feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, that's absolutely okay. You don't need to dismiss those emotions. Because I don't know about you, sometimes I feel that voice in my head go, why are you getting stressed out about this? Why can you not handle that? And actually that creates unnecessary internal conflict. It creates more stress because we feel that we must feel and act a certain way, and that creates more stress. So just accept your emotions. So the next time you feel down, next time you feel overwhelmed, just accept that, yeah, you know, I feel a bit overwhelmed at the moment because I'm living in a pandemic and my life is completely changed and I've got all this added responsibility. You know, I'm just speaking that out loud. Accept it, because Jesus validated, he had emotions all like us. And I love that. All these words are from adjectives that are used to describe Jesus, or words used to describe Jesus. And if we're called to become more like Jesus, then we are called to experience the emotions that he felt. He experienced the emotions. He walked on earth with us. So yeah, so what are some of the emotions that you're experiencing right now? You can share them if you want. Positive, some of you experience positive emotions, that's great. But you can also share some of the negative emotions that you've been experiencing and just accept them. That's one of the biggest things I've had to do in terms of my mental health. Accept the emotions that I'm feeling, not try to distract them or numb them in different ways, but just accept and sit with the uncomfortable emotions. So some of us are feeling anxiety, and this is a great acronym, so you might have come across this, that if you're feeling anxious, accept it, accept the emotion, challenge the anxiety. So you do that through your healthy coping mechanisms, talking to somebody, going for a run, eating well. And then when you have a bit of a clear mind, you can sit down and evaluate, was that situation, was that anxiety warranted? And sometimes it is acceptable and it's natural to be anxious. There is a real reason. But for some of us, we become anxious about things we can't control over. And that's where we need to really evaluate, you know, was it really good that I was anxious about that situation where I can't really control about it? So yes, accept that you're anxious, challenge the anxiety, and evaluate your anxiety. So we've got a couple of minutes to go. I went through CBT therapy, which is really good. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. That really helps reprogram your brain to think about, do I have negative thinking patterns that bring me down a dark road? Do I catastrophize? Do I minimize things? Am I an all or nothing person? Do I jump to conclusions? Now you're going to get the slides. I realize it's a bit quick, but you can challenge that negative thought, that unrealistic thought. You know, is this really true? Has this happened before? Am I falling into a thinking trap? Is this a possibility or is it a certainty? So yes, I'm just going to flick through that. You're going to get the slides later, because I want to talk about developing your healthy coping mechanisms. So I love this. I did this with young people. I really encourage you to do it. Get your emotional first aid kit. So this can be your connections with God, but it can also be different things. When you're feeling overwhelmed and exhausted and you're feeling a bit down, how do you manage that? How do you manage those difficult emotions? And it would be great for you to create your own emotional first aid kit. So these are some of the things that I do. I recognize that in pandemic, whenever the pandemic hit, I had to completely reconfigure my emotional first aid kit, because I couldn't go and see my family. You know, I couldn't actually walk up a mountain and like I couldn't go to my exercise classes, I had to go online. But there are things that we can do. And one of the things that's really practical, I love, if you're a morning person and you're able to, I try to go out and watch the sunrise, or I try to watch the sunset, and that really helps me. It helps put my life into perspective. And number 4, where we've got 2 more to go, I just want to say, it sounds really simple, doesn't it? But be kind to yourself. Be kind to how you speak to yourself. So I'll give you an example. A couple months ago, I went out for my morning walk and I came into my house. I live in an apartment building, and I didn't leave my house for about 9 hours. And about 5 o'clock, the doorbell went, and I opened the door, and it was my neighbor, and he said, "Do you know that your keys are in your door?" My keys have been in my door of my apartment block for 9 hours. And the first thing I wanted to say to myself was, "You're so stupid, Claire. Like, oh my goodness, that could have been," I went down the catastrophizing, like what could have happened if someone had got my keys and blah, blah, blah. Like, you're so stupid. And I stopped myself and I said, "Claire, that was a stupid thing that you did, but you're not stupid and you're a bit overwhelmed. I had other responsibilities that day. You need to take care of yourself better." So see how I framed that from being that critical negative voice to actually, this is an opportunity, you need to take care of yourself. And number 5, this is the most important one, isn't it? And it comes to our connection with God. Protect your identity in Christ. Remember who you are. The world wants to tell us that we need to be all these other things, but this is who God says that we are. These are words from the Bible, that we are blessed, that we are loved, that we are strong, and that we are victorious, and that we are known. So just look at, if you don't do anything else today, why don't you look up one of these verses in the Bible that tells you that you are loved? Jeremiah 31 verse 3. Why don't you just look at that for 5 minutes and really ask God to speak to you? But yeah, it's been great to be with you. And thank you so much for your time and for your attention. And I'm praying for you in your ministries. And if you're interested in finding out more about Girls Brigade, or you're interested in having a deeper chat with me, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much. And I'm praying for you. We're all going through, it's a difficult time. We're all experiencing it too. And I hope for one thing from today that you felt that you weren't alone in what you're feeling.
I just say a huge thank you to Claire for everything that she's talked about this morning. I know I have found it really helpful. I've got a page full of notes and books that I'm going to go and buy now. So thank you very much. I hope you have found it really useful. Just a reminder that this has been recorded, so if you want to watch it again, you can look on the Well Learning Hub YouTube channel, and you'll find, you will in a few hours, you'll find this webinar, but you'll also find other ones that Claire has done and previous webinars that we've had on offer. Speaking of that, there are a number of webinars coming up over the next few weeks. The best place to go, if you go to the Methodist Church website, go onto the Children and Youth section and look at the upcoming events, and you'll see a list of all our webinars. We've got one on Friday about intergenerational church. We've got one in a couple of weeks about involving children and young people in mission planning, and there's many more there as well. So do take a look at that. So that just leaves me to say thank you to you for all your engagement. I don't think I've been on a webinar where there has been quite so much in the chat. It's been brilliant to see your interaction and how you've been sharing your ideas and words of wisdom with each other. So thank you to you, and thank you to Claire. And I pray that you will have got something from this that will make a real difference in your lives. So take care, and hopefully we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.